The only way to get closer to truth is to expand your heart so that it will encompass all humanity and still have room for more love. You stay out of this, I said. I'm not taking orders from drunken dervishes. Unlike my father, that is. Aladdin, shame on you, my father broke in. I felt an instant and potent pang of guilt, but it was too late. So many resentments I thought I had left behind came flooding back to me. I have no doubt you hate me as much as you say you do, Shams proclaimed, but I don't think you have stopped loving your father even for a minute. Don't you see you are hurting him? Don't you see you are ruining our lives? I shot back. That was when my father lunged forward, his mouth set in a grim line, his right hand raised above his head. I thought he was going to slap me, but when he didn't, when he wouldn't, I felt even more uneasy. You shame me, my father said without looking at my face. My eyes welled with tears. I turned my head aside and suddenly came face to face with Kimya. How long had she been standing there watching us from a corner with fearful eyes? How much of this squabble had she heard? The shame of being humiliated by my father in front of the girl I wanted to marry churned in my stomach, leaving a bad taste in my mouth. It felt like the room was spinning all around me, threatening to collapse. Unable to stay there a moment longer, I grabbed my coat, pushed Shams aside, and dashed out of the house, away from Kimya, away from all of them. Shams Konya. February 1246. Bottles of wine stood between us, loaded with the smells of hot earth, wild herbs, and dark berries. After Aladdin was gone, Rumi was so sad he couldn't talk for a while. He and I stepped out into the snow-covered courtyard. It was one of those bleak February evenings when the air felt heavy with a peculiar stillness. We stood there watching the clouds move, listening to a world that offered us nothing but silence. The wind brought us a whiff of the forests from afar, fragrant and musky, and for a moment I believe we both wanted to leave this town for good. Then I took one of the bottles of wine. I knelt beside a climbing rose tree that stood thorny and bare in the snow, and I started to pour the wine on the soil beneath it. Rumi's face brightened as he smiled his half-thoughtful, half-excited smile. Slowly, stunningly, the bare rose tree came alive, its bark softening like human skin. It produced a single rose in front of our eyes. As I kept pouring the wine under the tree, the rose revealed a lovely warm shade of orange. Next I took the second bottle and poured it in the same way. The rose's orangey color turned into a bright crimson tone, glowing with life. Now there remained only a glassful of wine at the bottom of the bottle. I poured that into a glass, drank half of it, and the remaining half I offered to Rumi. He took the glass with trembling hands, responding to my gesture with a beaming reciprocity of kindness and equanimity, this man who had never touched alcohol in his life. Religious rules and prohibitions are important, he said. But they should not be turned into unquestionable taboos. It is with such awareness that I drink the wine you offer me today, believing with all my heart that there is a sobriety beyond the drunkenness of love. Just as Rumi was about to take the glass to his lips, I snatched it back and flung it to the ground. The wine spilled on the snow, like drops of blood. Don't drink it, I said, no longer feeling the need to continue with this trial. If you weren't going to ask me to drink this wine, why did you send me to the tavern in the first place? Rumi asked, his tone not so much curious as compassionate. You know why, I said, smiling. Spiritual growth is about the totality of our consciousness, not about obsessing over particular aspects. Rule number 32. Nothing should stand between yourself and God. Not imams, priests, rabbis, or any other custodians of moral or religious leadership. Not spiritual masters, not even your faith. Believe in your values and your rules, but never lord them over others. If you keep breaking other people's hearts, whatever religious duty you perform is no good. Stay away from all sorts of idolatry, for they will blur your vision. Let God and only God be your guide. Learn the truth, my friend, but be careful not to make a fetish out of your truths. I had always admired Rumi's personality and known that his compassion, endless and extraordinary, was what I lacked in life. But today my admiration for him had grown by leaps and bounds. This world was full of people obsessed with wealth, recognition, or power. The more signs of success they earned, the more they seemed to be in need of them. Greedy and covetous, they rendered worldly possessions their qibla, always looking in that direction, unaware of becoming the servants of the things they hungered after. That was a common pattern. It happened all the time. But it was rare as rubies, for a man who had already made his way up, a man who had plenty of gold, fame, and authority, to renounce his position all of a sudden one day and endanger his reputation for an inner journey, one that nobody could tell where or how it would end. Rumi was that rare ruby. God wants us to be modest and unpretentious, I said. And he wants to be known, Rumi added softly. He wants us to know him with every fiber of our being. That is why it is better to be watchful and sober than to be drunk and dizzy. I agreed. Until it turned dark and cold, we sat in the courtyard with a single red rose between us. There was, beneath the chill of the evening, the scent of something fresh and sweet. The wine of love made our heads spin gently, and I realized with glee and gratitude that the wind no longer whispered despair. Ella Northampton, June 24, 2008. Baby, there's a new Thai place in town, David said. They say it's good. Why don't we go there tonight? Just the two of us. The last thing Ella wanted to do on this Tuesday was go out for dinner with her husband. But David was so insistent that she couldn't say no. The Silver Moon was a small restaurant with stylish lamps, leather booths, black napkins, and so many mirrors hung low on every wall that the customers felt as if they were dining with their own reflections. It didn't take Ella long to feel out of place there. But it wasn't the restaurant that had made her feel this way. It was her husband. She had glimpsed in David's eyes an unusual glitter. Something wasn't normal. He looked pensive, worried, even. What disturbed her most was that he had stuttered a few times. Ella knew that for his childhood speech impediment to surface, David had to be very distressed. A young waitress dressed in a traditional outfit came to take their orders. David asked for chili basil scallops, and Ella decided on the vegetables and tofu in coconut sauce, staying true to her 40th birthday decision to refrain from eating meat. They also ordered wine. They talked about the sophisticated decor for a few minutes, discussing the effect of black napkins versus white napkins. Then there was silence. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of sleeping in the same bed, sharing the same shower, eating the same food, raising 3 kids, and what it all added up to was silence. Or so Ella thought. I see you've been reading Rumi, David remarked. Ella nodded, though with some surprise. She didn't know what surprised her more, to hear that David knew about Rumi or that he cared about what she read. I started reading his poetry to help me to write my report on sweet blasphemy, but then I became interested in it, and now I'm reading it for myself, Ella said by way of explanation. David grew distracted by a wine stain on the tablecloth, then sighed with a valedictory expression on his face. Ella, I know what's going on, he said. I know everything. What are you talking about? Ella asked, although she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. About your affair, David stammered. I'm aware of it. Ella looked at her husband, flabbergasted. In the glow of the candle that the waitress had just lit for them, David's face showed pure despair. My affair, Ella blurted out, quicker and louder than she intended. She instantly noticed the couple at the next table turning in their direction. Embarrassed, she dropped her voice to a whisper and repeated, what affair? I'm not stupid, David said. I checked your email account and read your messages with that man. You did what? Ella exclaimed. Ignoring the question, his face contorted with the weight of what he was about to announce, David said, I don't blame you, Ella. I deserve it. I neglected you, and you looked for compassion elsewhere. Ella lowered her gaze to her glass. The wine had a charming color, a deep, dark ruby. For a second she thought she glimpsed specks of iridescent sparkle on its surface, like a trail of lights guiding her. And perhaps there was a trail. It all felt surreal. Now David paused, deciding how best, or whether, to reveal what he had in mind. I'm ready to forgive you and leave this behind, he finally remarked. There were many things Ella wanted to say at that moment, poignant and mocking, tense and dramatic, but she chose the easiest one. With gleaming eyes, she asked, what about your affairs? Are you also going to leave them behind? The waitress arrived then with their orders. Ella and David sat back and watched her leave the plates on the table and refill the glasses with exaggerated politeness. When she finally left, David flicked his eyes up toward Ella and asked, so is this what this was about? Was it for revenge? No, Ella said, shaking her head in disappointment. This is not about revenge. It never was. Then what is it about? Ella clasped her hands, feeling as if everything and everyone in the restaurant, the customers, the waiters, the cooks, and even the tropical fish in the fish tank, had stopped to hear what she was going to say. It is about love, she said at last. I love Aziz. Ella expected her husband to roll with laughter. But when she finally found the courage to look him in the eye, there was only horror on his face, quickly replaced by the expression of someone who was trying to solve a problem with minimal damage. Suddenly she had a moment of knowing. Love was a serious word, loaded and quite unusual, for her, a woman who had said so many negative things about love in the past. We have 3 kids, David said, his voice trailing off. Yes, and I love them very much, Ella said with a slump in her shoulders. But I also love Aziz. Stop using that word, David interjected. He took a big gulp from his glass before he spoke again. I made major mistakes, but I never stopped loving you, Ella. And I have never loved anyone else. We can both learn from our mistakes. For my part, one can promise you that the same thing won't happen again. You don't need to go out and look for love anymore. I didn't go out and seek love, Ella muttered, more to herself than to him. Rumi says we don't need to hunt for love outside ourselves. All we need to do is to eliminate the barriers inside that keep us away from love. Oh, my God, what's come over you? This isn't you. Stop being so romantic, will you? Come back to your old self, David snapped, then added, please. Ella furrowed her brow and inspected her nails as if there were something about them troubling her. In truth, she'd remembered another moment in time when she herself had said virtually the same words to her daughter. She felt as if a circle had been completed. Nodding her head slowly, she put her napkin aside. Can we please go now? She said. I'm not hungry. That night they slept in separate beds. And early in the morning, the first thing Ella did was write a letter to Aziz. The Zealot Konya, February 1246, batten down the hatches. Sheikh Yassin, did you hear the scandal? Abdullah, the father of one of my students, exclaimed as he approached me on the street. Rumi was seen in a tavern in the Jewish quarter yesterday. Yes, I heard about that, I said, but I wasn't surprised. The man has a Christian wife, and his best friend is a heretic. What did you expect? Abdullah nodded gravely. I guess you were right. We should have seen it coming. A number of passers-by gathered around us, overhearing our conversation. Somebody suggested that Rumi should not be allowed to preach in the Great Mosque anymore. Not until he apologized publicly. I agreed. Being late for my class in the madrasa, I then left them to their talk and hurried off. I had always suspected that Rumi had a dark side ready to float up to the surface someday. But even I hadn't expected him to take to the bottle. It was utterly disgusting. People say Shams is the primary reason for the downfall of Rumi, and if he weren't around, Rumi would go back to normal. But I hold a different view. Not that I doubt that Shams is an evil man, he is, or that he doesn't have a bad influence on Rumi, he does, but the question is, why can't Shams lead other scholars astray, such as me? At the end of the day, those two are alike in more ways than people are willing to recognize. There are people who heard Shams remark, a scholar lives on the marks of a pen. A Sufi loves and lives on footprints. Now, what does that mean? Apparently Shams thinks scholars talk the talk and Sufis walk the walk. But Rumi, too, is a scholar, isn't he? Or does he not consider himself one of us anymore? Should Shams enter my classroom, I would chase him away like a fly, never giving him the opportunity to sputter gibberish in my presence. Why can't Rumi do the same? There must be something wrong with him. The man has a Christian wife, for starters. I don't care if she has converted to Islam. It is in her blood and in the blood of her child. Unfortunately, the townspeople don't take the threat of Christianity as seriously as they should, and they assume that we can live side by side. To those who are naive enough to believe that, I always say, can water and oil ever mix? That is the extent to which Muslims and Christians can. Having a Christian for a wife and being notoriously soft toward minorities, Rumi was already an undependable man in my eyes, but when Shams of Tabriz started living under his roof, he totally deviated from the right path. As I tell my students every day, one needs to be alert against shaitan. And Shams is the devil incarnate. I am sure it was his idea to send Rumi to the tavern. God knows how he convinced him. But isn't beguiling righteous people into sacrilege what Shaitan excels at? I understood Shams's evil side right from the start. How dare he compare the Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, with that irreligious Sufi Bistami? Wasn't it Bistami who pronounced, "Look at me. How great is my glory"? Wasn't it he who then said, "I saw the Kaaba walking around me"? The man went as far as stating, "I am the smith of my own self." If this is not blasphemy, then what is? Such is the level of the man Shams quotes with respect. For just like Bistami, he, too, is a heretic. The only good news is that the townspeople are waking up to the truth. Finally, Shams's critics increase with each passing day. And the things they say, even I am appalled sometimes. In the bathhouses and teahouses, in the wheat fields and orchards, people tear him apart. I reached the madrasa later than usual, my mind heavy with these thoughts. As soon as I opened the door to my classroom, I sensed there was something unusual. My students were sitting in a perfect line, pale and oddly silent, as if they had all seen a ghost. Then I understood why. Sitting there by the open window with his back resting against the wall, his hairless face lit with an arrogant smile, was none other than Shams of Tabriz. "Salamun alaikum, Sheikh Yassin," he said, staring hard at me across the room. I hesitated, not knowing whether to greet him, and decided not to. Instead I turned to my students and inquired, "What is this man doing here? Why did you let him in?" Dazed and uneasy, none of the students dared to answer. It was Shams himself who shattered the silence. His tone insolent, his gaze unwavering, he said to me, "Don't scold them, Sheikh Yassin. It was my idea. You see, I was in the neighborhood and said to myself, why don't I stop by the madrasa and visit the one person in this town who hates me most?" Husam the student Konya, February 1246. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, we were all sitting on the floor in the classroom when the door opened and in walked Shams of Tabriz. Everyone was stunned, having heard so many bad and bizarre things about him, mostly from our teacher. I, too, couldn't help but cringe upon seeing him in our classroom in the flesh. He, however, seemed relaxed and friendly. After greeting us all, he said he had come to have a word with Sheikh Yassin. "Our teacher doesn't like to have strangers in the classroom. Perhaps you should talk to him some other time," I said, hoping to avoid a nasty encounter. "Thanks for your concern, young man, but sometimes nasty encounters are not only inevitable, they are necessary," Shams answered, as if he had read my thoughts. "Don't you worry, though. It won't take too long." Ershad, sitting next to me, muttered between clenched teeth, "Look at his nerve. He is the devil incarnate." I nodded, though I wasn't sure Shams looked like the devil to me. Set against him as I was, I couldn't help liking his forthrightness and audacity. A few minutes later, Sheikh Yassin entered through the door, his brow furrowed in contemplation. He had taken no more than a few steps inside when he stopped and blinked distractedly in the direction of the uninvited visitor. "What is this man doing here? Why did you let him in?" My friends and I exchanged shocked glances and frightened whispers, but before anyone could muster the courage to say anything, Shams blurted out that he had been in the neighborhood and had decided to visit the one person in Konya who hated him most. I heard several students cough tautly and saw Ershad draw in a sharp breath. The tension between the two men was so thick that the air in the classroom could be cut with a knife. "I don't know what you are doing here, but I have better things to do than talk to you," Sheikh Yassin reprimanded. "Now, why don't you take your leave, so that we can get on with our studies?" "You say you won't talk to me, but you have been talking about me," Shams remarked. "You have constantly spoken ill of me and Rumi, and of all the mystics along the Sufi path." Sheikh Yassin sniffed through his big, bony nose and narrowed his mouth to a pout, as if he had something sour on his tongue. "As I said, I have nothing to talk with you about. I already know what I need to know. I have my opinions." Shams now turned to us with a swift, sardonic glance. "A man with many opinions but no questions. There's something so wrong with that." "Really?" Sheikh Yassin looked amused and animated. "Then why don't we ask the students which of the two they'd rather be, the wise man who knows the answers or the perplexed man who has nothing but questions?" All of my friends sided with Sheikh Yassin, but I sensed that many did so less out of sincere agreement than to get favors from the teacher. I chose to remain silent. One who thinks he has all the answers is the most ignorant, Shams said with a dismissive shrug, and turned to our teacher. But since you are so good with answers, may I ask you a question? That was when I started to worry about where this conversation was heading. But there was nothing I could do to prevent the escalating tension. Since you claim I am the devil's servant, could you kindly tell us what exactly your notion of Shaitan is? Asked Shams. Certainly, Sheikh Yassin said, never missing an opportunity to preach. Our religion, which is the last and the best of Abrahamic religions, tells us it was Shaitan who caused Adam and Eve to be expelled from heaven. As the children of fallen parents, we all need to be alert, because Shaitan comes in many forms. Sometimes he comes in the form of a gambler who invites us to gamble, sometimes a beautiful young woman who tries to seduce us. Shaitan can come in the least expected forms, like that of a wandering dervish. As if expecting this remark, Shams smiled knowingly. I see what you mean. It must be a huge relief, and an easy way out, to think the devil is always outside of us. What do you mean? Sheikh Yassin asked. Well, if Shaitan is as wicked and indomitable as you are saying he is, then we human beings have no reason to blame ourselves for our wrongdoings. Whatever good happens we'll attribute to God, and all the bad things in life we'll simply attribute to Shaitan. In either case we'll be exempt from all criticism and self-examination. How easy that is. Still talking, Shams started to pace the room, his voice rising with each word. But let's for one moment imagine there is no Shaitan. No demons waiting to burn us in scorching cauldrons. All these blood-curdling images were designed to show us something, but then they became clichés and lost their original message. And what might that message be? Sheikh Yassin asked wearily, crossing his arms on his chest. Ah, so you do have questions after all, Shams said. The message is that the torment a person can inflict upon himself is endless. Hell is inside us, and so is heaven. The Quran says human beings are the most dignified. We are higher than the highest, but also lower than the lowest. If we could grasp the full meaning of this, we would stop looking for Shaitan outside and instead focus on ourselves. What we need is sincere self-examination, not being on the watch for the faults of others. You go and examine yourself, and inshallah someday you will redeem yourself, Sheikh Yassin answered, but a proper scholar has to keep an eye on his community. Then allow me to tell you a story, Shams said, with such graciousness that we couldn't be sure whether he was sincere or mocking. And here is what he told us. 4 merchants were praying in a mosque when they saw the muezzin enter. The first merchant stopped his prayer and asked, Muezzin, has the prayer been called? Or do we still have time? The second merchant stopped praying and turned to his friend. Hey, you spoke while you were praying. Your prayer is now void. You need to start anew. Upon hearing this, the third merchant interjected, why do you blame him, you idiot? You should have minded your own prayer. Now yours is void, too. The fourth merchant broke into a smile and said loudly, look at them. All 3 have messed up. Thank God I'm not one of the misguided. After telling this story, Shams stood facing the classroom and asked, so what do you think? Which of the merchants' prayers, in your opinion, were invalid? There was a brief stirring in the classroom as we discussed the answer among ourselves. Finally someone at the back said, the second, the third, and the fourth merchant's prayers were void. But the first merchant is innocent, because all he wanted was to consult the muezzin. Yes, but he shouldn't have abandoned his prayer like that, Irshad interposed. It is obvious that all the merchants were wrong, except the fourth one, who was just talking to himself. I averted my gaze, disagreeing with both answers but determined to keep my mouth shut. I had a feeling my views might not be welcome. But no sooner had this thought crossed my mind than Shams of Tabriz pointed at me and asked, and you over there? What do you think? I swallowed hard before I could find my voice. If these merchants made a mistake, it is not because they spoke during prayer, I said, but because instead of minding their own business and connecting with God, they were more interested in what was going on around them. However, if we pass judgment on them, I am afraid we'll be making the same crucial mistake. So what is your answer? Sheikh Yassin asked, suddenly interested in the conversation. My answer is, all 4 merchants have erred for a similar reason, and yet none of them can be said to be in the wrong, because at the end of the day, it is not up to us to judge them. Shams of Tabriz took a step toward me and looked at me with such affection and kindness that I felt like a little boy savoring the unconditional love of a parent. He asked my name, and when I told him, he remarked, "Your friend Husam here has a Sufi heart." I blushed up to my ears when I heard this. There was no doubt I would be scolded by Sheikh Yassin after the class and mocked and ridiculed by my friends. But all my worries quickly evaporated. I sat straight and smiled at Shams. He gave me a wink in return and, still smiling, continued to explain. The Sufi says, I should mind my inner encounter with God rather than judging other people. An orthodox scholar, however, is always on the lookout for the mistakes of others. But don't forget, students, most of the time he who complains about others is himself at fault. Stop confusing the minds of my students. Sheikh Yassin broke in. As scholars we cannot afford to be disinterested in what others are doing. People ask us many questions and expect to be answered duly, so that they can live their religion fully and properly. They ask us if their ablutions need to be redone should their noses bleed or if it is okay to fast while traveling and so on. The Shafi, Hanafi, Hanbali, and Maliki teachings differ from one another when it comes to these matters. Each school of law has its own set of meticulous answers that must be studied and learned. That's good, but don't get so attached to nominal distinctions. Shams sighed. The logos of God is complete. Don't reach for details at the expense of the whole. Details. Sheikh Yassin echoed incredulously. Believers take rules seriously. And we scholars guide them in their endeavor. Keep guiding. That is, as long as you don't forget that your guidance is limited and there is no word above the word of God, Shams said, and then he added, but try not to preach to those who have attained enlightenment. They derive a different pleasure in the verses of the Quran and so do not require the guidance of a sheikh. Upon hearing this, Sheikh Yassin got so furious that his withered cheeks flushed waves of crimson and his Adam's apple jutted out sharply. There is nothing temporary in the guidance we provide, he said. The Sharia constitutes the rules and regulations that every Muslim should consult from cradle to grave. The Sharia is only a boat that sails in the ocean of truth. The true seeker of God will sooner or later abandon the vessel and plunge into the sea. So that sharks might eat him up, Sheikh Yassin retorted, chuckling. That's what happens to the one who refuses to be guided. A few students joined in the chuckle, but the rest of us sat quietly, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. The class was coming to an end, and I couldn't see how this conversation could conclude on a positive note. Shams of Tabriz must have felt the same gloom, for he looked pensive now, almost forlorn. He closed his eyes as if suddenly tired of so much talk, a move so subtle as to be almost imperceptible. In all my travels, I have come to know many sheikhs, Shams said. While some were sincere men, others were condescending, and they didn't know anything about Islam. I wouldn't trade the dust off of the old shoes of a real lover of God for the heads of today's sheikhs. Even shadow players who display images behind curtains are better than they are, because at least they admit that what they provide is mere illusion. That's enough. I think we've heard enough of your forked tongue, Sheikh Yassin announced. Now, get out of my classroom. Don't worry, I was about to leave, Shams said roguishly, and then he turned toward us. What you witnessed here today is an old debate that extends back to the time of the Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, he remarked. But the debate is not only germane to the history of Islam. It is present in the heart of every Abrahamic religion. This is the conflict between the scholar and the mystic, between the mind and the heart. You take your pick. Shams paused briefly to let us feel the full impact of his words. I felt his stare fall upon me, and it was almost like sharing a secret, entrance into an untold, unwritten brotherhood. Then he added, in the end, neither your teacher nor I can know more than God allows us to know. We all play our parts. Only one thing matters, though. That the light of the sun isn't overshadowed by the blindness of the eye of the denier, the one who refuses to see. With that, Shams of Tabriz placed his right hand on his heart and bade farewell to us all, including Sheikh Yassin, who stood aside, grim and unresponsive. The dervish walked out and shut the door behind him, leaving us swathed in a silence so profound that we could not talk or fidget for a long while. It was Ershad who pulled me out of my trance. I noticed he was staring at me with something akin to disapproval. Only then did I realize that my right hand was resting on my heart in salute to a truth that it had recognized. Baybars the Warrior Konya, May 1246 bloody but unbowed. I couldn't believe my ears when I heard that Shams had found the nerve to confront my uncle in front of his students. Doesn't this man have any decency? How I wished I had been in the madrasa when he arrived. I would have kicked him out before he even had the chance to open that wicked mouth of his. But I wasn't there, and it seems that he and my uncle had a long conversation, which the students have been blabbering about ever since. I take their words with a grain of salt, though, since their accounts are inconsistent and give too much credit to that rotten dervish. I feel very nervous tonight. It is all because of that harlot Desert Rose. I can't rid my mind of her. She reminds me of jewelry boxes with secret compartments. You think you own her, but unless you have the keys, she remains locked up and unreachable even when you hold her in your arms. It is her surrendering that troubles me most. I keep asking myself why she didn't resist my fits. How come she just lay there on the floor under my feet, listless as a dirty old rug? Had she hit me back or screamed for help, I would have stopped hitting her. But she lay motionless, her eyes bulging, her mouth shut, as if determined to take it on the chin, come what may. Did she really not care at all whether I killed her? I have been trying hard not to go to the brothel again, but today I gave in to the need to see her. On the way there, I kept wondering how she would react upon seeing me. In case she complained about me and things got nasty, I was going to bribe or threaten that fat patron of hers. I had everything worked out in my mind and was ready for every possibility, except for the possibility of her having run away. What do you mean? Desert Rose is not here. I burst out. Where is she? Forget about that harlot, the patron said, popping a locum into her mouth and sucking the syrup off of her finger. Seeing how upset I was, she added in a softer voice, why don't you take a look at the other girls, Baybars? I don't want your cheap whores, you fat hag. I need to see Desert Rose, and I need to see her now. The hermaphrodite raised her dark, pointed eyebrows at this form of address but didn't dare to argue with me. Her voice dwindled to a whisper, as if ashamed of what she was about to say. She is gone. Apparently she ran away while everyone was sleeping. It was too absurd to be even laughable. Since when do whores walk out of their brothels? I asked. You find her now. The patron looked at me as if she were really seeing me, for the first time. Who are you to give me orders? She hissed, as her small, defiant eyes, so unlike those of Desert Rose, blazed back at me. I am a security guard who has an uncle in high places. I can shut this den down and put you all out on the street, I said as I reached over to the bowl on her lap and plucked out a locum. It was soft and chewy. I wiped my sticky fingers on the patron's silk scarf. Her face became livid with rage, but she did not dare to pick a fight. Why are you blaming me? She said. Blame that dervish. He is the one who convinced Desert Rose to leave the brothel and find God. For a moment I couldn't understand who she was talking about, but then it dawned upon me it was no other than Shams of Tabriz that she meant. First disrespecting my uncle in front of his students, and now this. Clearly that heretic didn't know his boundaries. Ella Northampton, June 26, 2008. Beloved Aziz, I decided to write you a letter this time. You know, the old-fashioned way, with ink, a perfumed paper, a matching envelope, and a stamp. I am going to mail it to Amsterdam this afternoon. I need to do this right away because if I delay in mailing my letter, I am afraid I will never be able to do it. First you meet someone who is completely different from everyone around you. Someone who sees everything in a different light and forces you to shift, change your angle of vision, observe everything anew, within and without. You think you can keep a safe distance from him. You think you can navigate your way through this beautiful storm until you realize, much too suddenly, you are thrust out into the open and in fact you control nothing. I cannot tell when exactly I became captivated by your words. All I know is, our correspondence has been changing me. Right from the start. Chances are I will regret saying this. But having spent my whole life regretting the things I failed to do, I see no harm in doing something regrettable for a change. Ever since I met you through your novel and your emails, you have dominated my thoughts. Every time I read an email from you, I feel something inside me swirl and realize that I have not known such contentment and excitement in a long while. Throughout the day you were on my mind all the time. I talked to you silently, wondering how you would respond to every new stimulus in my life. When I go to a nice restaurant, I want to go there with you. When I see anything of interest, I am saddened by not being able to show it to you. The other day my younger daughter asked me if I had done something with my hair. My hair is the same as always. But it's true that I look different, because I feel different. Then I remind myself that we haven't even met yet. And that brings me back to reality. And the reality is that I don't know what to do with you. I have finished reading your novel and turned in my report. Oh, yes, I was writing an editorial report on it. There were times when I wanted to share my views with you, or at least send you the report I gave the literary agent, but I thought that wouldn't be right. Although I can't share with you the details of my report, you should know that I absolutely loved your book. Thank you for the pleasure. Your words will stay with me always. Anyway, sweet blasphemy has nothing to do with my decision to write this letter, or perhaps it has everything to do with it. What has compelled me is this thing between us, whatever it is, and its overwhelming impact upon me is eluding my control. It has become more serious than I can handle. I first loved your imagination and your stories, and then I realized I love the man behind the stories. Now I don't know what to do with you. As I said, I need to send this letter immediately. If not, I will have to tear it into a dozen bits. I will act as if there is nothing new in my life, nothing unusual. Yes, I could do what I always do and pretend that everything is normal. I could pretend if it weren't for this sweet ache in my heart. With love, Ella Karakonia, May 1246 Baptism of Fire. I don't know how to deal with this situation. This morning, out of nowhere, a woman came asking for Shams of Tabriz. I told her to come back later, as he wasn't at home, but she said she had nowhere to go and would rather wait in the courtyard. That was when I got suspicious and started to inquire into who she was and where she came from. She fell to her knees and opened her veil, showing a face scarred and swollen from many beatings. Despite her bruises and cuts, she was very pretty and so lithe. Amid tears and sobs, and in a surprisingly articulate way, she confirmed what I had already suspected. She was a harlot from the brothel. But I have abandoned that awful place, she said. I went to the public bath and washed myself 40 times with 40 prayers. I took an oath to stay away from men. From now on, my life is dedicated to God. Not knowing what to say, I stared into her wounded eyes and wondered how she, young and fragile as she was, had found the courage to abandon the only life she knew. I didn't want to see a fallen woman anywhere near my house, but there was something about her that broke my heart, a kind of simplicity, almost innocence, I had never seen in anyone before. Her brown eyes reminded me of Mother Mary's eyes. I couldn't bring myself to shoo her away. I let her wait in the courtyard. That was the most I could do. She sat there by the wall, staring into space as motionless as a marble statue. An hour later, when Shams and Rumi returned from their walk, I rushed to tell them about the unexpected visitor. Did you say there was a harlot in our courtyard? Rumi asked, sounding puzzled. Yes, and she says she has left the brothel to find God. Oh, that must be Desert Rose, Shams exclaimed, his tone not so much surprised as pleased. Why did you keep her outside? Bring her in. But what will our neighbors say if they learn we have a harlot under our roof? I objected, my voice cracking with the tension. Aren't we all living under the same roof anyhow? Shams said, pointing to the sky above. Kings and beggars, virgins and harlots, all are under the same sky. How could I argue with Shams? He always had a ready answer for everything. I ushered the harlot into the house, praying that the inquisitive eyes of the neighbors would not fall upon us. No sooner had Desert Rose entered the room than she ran to kiss the hands of Shams, sobbing. I am so glad you are here. Shams beamed as if talking to an old friend. You won't go back to that place ever again. That stage of your life is completely over. May God make your journey toward truth a fruitful one. Desert Rose commenced to cry harder. But the patron will never leave me in peace. She will send Jackal Head after me. You don't know how. Clear your mind, child, Shams interrupted. Remember another rule. While everyone in this world strives to get somewhere and become someone, only to leave it all behind after death, you aim for the supreme stage of nothingness. Live this life as light and empty as the number 0. We are no different from a pot. It is not the decorations outside but the emptiness inside that holds us straight. Just like that, it is not what we aspire to achieve but the consciousness of nothingness that keeps us going. Late in the evening, I showed Desert Rose the bed where she would sleep. And when she fell asleep immediately, I returned to the main room, where I found Rumi and Shams talking. "You should come to our performance," Shams said when he saw me coming. "What performance?" I asked. "A spiritual dance, Kara, the likes of which you have never seen." I looked at my husband in astonishment. What was going on? What dance were they talking about? "Maulana, you are a respected scholar, not an entertainer. What will people think of you?" I asked, feeling my face growing hot. "Don't you worry," Rumi said. "Shams and I have been talking about this for a long time. We want to introduce the dance of the whirling dervishes. It is called the Sema. Whoever yearns for divine love is more than welcome to join us." My head started to ache madly, but the pain was slight compared to the torment in my heart. What if people don't like it? Not everyone thinks highly of dance, I said to Shams, hoping this would have the effect of stopping whatever he was about to say next. "At least consider postponing this performance." "Not everyone thinks highly of God," Shams said without missing a beat. "Are we going to postpone believing in him, too?" And that was the end of the argument. There were no more words to exchange, and the sound of the wind filled the house, bursting through the slats in the walls and pounding in my ears. Sultan Walid Konya, June 1246, "Beauty is in the eye of the beholder," Shams kept saying. "Everybody will watch the same dance, but each will see it differently. So why worry? Some will like it, some won't." Yet on the evening of the Sema, I told Shams I was worried that nobody would show up. "Don't worry," he said forcefully. "The townspeople might not like me, they might not even be fond of your father anymore, but they cannot possibly ignore us. Their curiosity will bring them here." And just so, on the evening of the performance, I found the open-air hall packed. There were merchants, blacksmiths, carpenters, peasants, stonecutters, dye-makers, medicine vendors, guild masters, clerks, potters, bakers, mourners, soothsayers, rat-catchers, perfume sellers. Even Sheikh Yassin had come with a group of students. Women were sitting in the rear. I was relieved to see the sovereign Kekusra sitting with his advisors in the front row. That a man of such a high rank supported my father would keep tongues quiet. It took a long time for the members of the audience to settle down, and even after they had, the noise inside didn't fully subside and there remained a murmur of heated gossip. In my itch to sit next to someone who would not speak ill of Shams, I sat next to Suleiman the drunk. The man reeked of wine, but I didn't mind. My legs were jumpy, my palms sweaty, and though the air was warm enough for us to take off our cloaks, my teeth chattered. This performance was so important for my father's declining reputation. I prayed to God, but since I didn't know what exactly to ask for, other than things turning out all right, my prayer sounded too lame. Shortly there came a sound, first from far away, and then it drew nearer. It was so captivating and moving that all held their breath, listening. "What kind of an instrument is this?" Suleiman whispered with a mixture of awe and delight. "It is called the ney," I said, remembering a conversation between my father and Shams. "And its sound is the sigh of the lover for the beloved." When the ney abated, my father appeared on stage. With measured, soft steps, he approached and greeted the audience. 6 dervishes followed him, all my father's disciples, all wearing long white garments with large skirts. They crossed their hands on their chests, bowing in front of my father to get his blessing. Then the music started, and, one by one, the dervishes began to spin, first slowly, then with breathtaking speed, their skirts opening up like lotus flowers. It was quite a scene. I couldn't help but smile with pride and joy. Out of the corner of my eye, I checked the reaction of the audience. Even the nastiest gossipers were watching the performance with visible admiration. The dervishes whirled and whirled for what seemed like an eternity. Then the music rose, the sound of a rabab from behind a curtain catching up with the ney and the drums. And that was when Shams of Tabriz entered the stage, like the wild desert wind. Wearing a darker robe than everyone else and looking taller, he was also spinning faster. His hands were wide open toward the sky, as was his face, like a sunflower in search of the sun. I heard many people in the audience gasp with awe. Even those who hated Shams of Tabriz seemed to have fallen under the spell of the moment. I glanced at my father. While Shams spun in a frenzy and the disciples whirled more slowly in their orbits, my father remained as still as an old oak tree, wise and calm, his lips constantly moving in prayer. Finally the music slowed down. All at once the dervishes stopped whirling, each lotus flower closing up into itself. With a tender salute, my father blessed everyone on stage and in the audience, and for a moment it was as if we were all connected in perfect harmony. A thick, sudden silence ensued. Nobody knew how to react. Nobody had seen anything like this before. My father's voice pierced the silence. This, my friends, is called the Sema, the dance of the whirling dervishes. From this day on, dervishes of every age will dance the Sema. One hand pointed up to the sky, the other hand pointing down to earth. Every speck of love we receive from God, we pledge to distribute to the people. The audience smiled and mumbled in agreement. There was a warm, friendly commotion all over the hall. I was so touched by seeing this affirming response that tears welled up in my eyes. At long last my father and Shams were beginning to receive the respect and love that they most certainly deserved. The evening could have ended on that warm note and I could have gone home a happy man, feeling confident that things were improving, had it not been for what happened next, ruining everything. Suleiman the Drunk Konya, June 1246. Blood and Thunder. What an unforgettable evening. I still have not recovered from its effects. And of all the things that I have witnessed tonight, the most startling was the finale. After the Sema, the great Kekusra too stood up, his eyes ranging round the room imperiously. In consummate smugness he approached the stage, and after giving a great whoop of laughter, he said, "Congratulations, dervishes. I was impressed by your performance." Rumi gracefully thanked him, and all the dervishes on stage did the same. Then the musicians stood up together and greeted the sovereign with ultimate respect. His face brimming with satisfaction, Kekusra signaled to one of his guards, who immediately handed him a velvet pouch. Kekusra bounced the pouch in his palm several times to show how heavy it was with golden coins and then flung it onto the stage. People around me sighed and applauded. So deeply were we moved by the generosity of our ruler. Content and confident, Kekusra turned to leave. But no sooner had he taken a step toward the exit than the very pouch he'd flung on the stage was tossed back at him. The coins landed under his feet, jingling like a new bride's bracelets. Everything had happened so fast that for a full minute we all stood still and perplexed, unable to make sense of what was going on. But no doubt the one who was most shocked was Kekusra himself. The insult was so obvious and definitely too personal to be forgivable. He looked over his shoulder with unbelieving eyes to see who could have done such a horrible thing. It was Shams of Tabriz. All heads turned toward him as he stood on stage, arms akimbo, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "We don't dance for money," he boomed in a deep voice. "The Sema is a spiritual dance performed for love and love alone. So take back your gold, sovereign. Your money is no good here." A dreadful silence descended upon the hall. Rumi's elder son looked so shaken that all the blood had been drained from his young face. Nobody dared to make a sound. Without a sigh, without a gasp, we all held our breaths. As if the skies had been waiting for this signal, it started to rain, sharp and stinging. The raindrops drowned everything and everyone in their steady sound. "Let's go," Kekusra yelled to his men. His cheeks wobbling with humiliation, his lips quivering uncontrollably, and his shoulders visibly slumped, the sovereign headed for the exit. His many guards and servants scurried behind him one by one, stomping on the spilled coins on the floor with their heavy boots. People rushed to scoop up the coins, pushing and pulling one another. As soon as the sovereign had left, a murmur of disapproval and disappointment rippled through the audience. "Who does he think he is?" Some people burst out. "How dare he insult our ruler?" Others joined in. "What if Kekusra makes the whole town pay the price now?" A group of people stood up, shaking their heads in disbelief, and stalked toward the exit in a clear sign of protest. At the head of the protesters were Sheikh Yassin and his students. To my great surprise, I noticed among them two of Rumi's old disciples, and his own son Aladdin. Aladdin Konya, June 1246. By Allah, I had never been so embarrassed in my life. As if it weren't shameful enough to see my own father in cahoots with a heretic, I had to suffer the mortification of watching him lead a dance performance. How could he disgrace himself like that in front of the whole town? On top of this, I was utterly appalled when I heard there was among the audience a harlot from the brothel. As I sat there wondering how much more madness and destruction my father's love for Shams could cause us all, for the first time in my life I wished to be the son of another man. To me the entire performance was sheer sacrilege. But what happened afterward was far beyond the pale. How could that insolent man find the nerve to pour scorn on our ruler? He is very lucky that Kekusra didn't have him arrested on the spot and sent to the gallows. When I saw Sheikh Yassin walk out after Kekusra, I knew I had to do the same. The last thing I wanted was for the townspeople to think that I was on the side of a heretic. Everyone had to see once and for all that, unlike my brother, I wasn't my father's puppet. That night I didn't go home. I stayed at Ershad's house with a few friends. Overcome with emotion, we talked about the day's events and discussed at great length what to do. That man is a terrible influence on your father, said Ershad tautly. And now he has brought a prostitute into your house. You need to clean your family's name, Aladdin. As I stood listening to the things they said, my face burning with a scalding shame, one thing was clear to me: Shams had brought us nothing but misery. In unison we reached the conclusion that Shams had to leave this town, if not willingly, then by force. The next day I went back home determined to talk to Shams of Tabriz man to man. I found him alone in the courtyard, playing the ney, his head bowed, his eyes closed, his back turned to me. Fully immersed in his music, he hadn't noticed my presence. I approached as quiet as a mouse, taking the opportunity to observe him and get to know my enemy better. After what seemed like several minutes, the music stopped. Shams raised his head slightly, and without looking in my direction, he mumbled flatly, as if talking to himself, "Hey there, Aladdin, were you looking for me?" I didn't say a word. Knowing of his ability to see through closed doors, it didn't surprise me that he had eyes in the back of his head. "So did you enjoy the performance yesterday?" Shams asked, now turning his face toward mine. "I thought it was disgraceful," I answered at once. "Let's get something straight, shall we? I don't like you. I never have, and I'm not going to let you ruin my father's reputation any more than you have already." A spark flickered in his eyes as Shams put his ney aside and said, "Is that what this is about? If Rumi's reputation is ruined, people won't look up to you as the son of an eminent man anymore. Does that scare you?" Determined not to let him get under my skin, I ignored his mordant remarks. Still, it was a while before I could say anything. "Why don't you go and leave us in peace? We were so good before you came," I shot back. "My father is a respected scholar and a family man. You two have nothing in common." His neck craned forward, his brow furrowed in mighty concentration. Shams drew in a deep breath. Suddenly he looked old and vulnerable. It flashed through my mind that I could slug him, beat him to a pulp, before anyone could run to his rescue. The thought was so dreadful and malevolent, and yet frighteningly seducing, that I had to avert my eyes. When I stared back at him, I found Shams inspecting me, his gaze avid, bright. Could he be reading my mind? A creepy feeling got hold of me, spreading from my hands to my feet, as if I were being pricked by 1,000 needles, and my knees felt wobbly, unwilling to carry me. It must have been black magic. I had no doubt that Shams excelled in the darkest forms of sorcery. "You are scared of me, Aladdin," Shams said after a pause. "You know who you remind me of. The cross-eyed assistant." "What are you talking about?" I said. "It's a story." "Do you like stories?" I shrugged. "I have no time for them." A flicker of condescension crossed Shams's lips. "A man who has no time for stories is a man who has no time for God," he said. "Don't you know that God is the best storyteller?" And without waiting for me to say anything, he told me this story. Once there was an artisan who had a bitter assistant, who was cross-eyed to boot. This assistant always saw double. One day the artisan asked him to bring a jar of honey from storage. The assistant came back empty-handed. "But, master, there are 2 jars of honey there," he complained. "Which one do you want me to bring?" Knowing his assistant too well, the artisan said, "Why don't you break one of the jars and bring me the other one?" Alas, the assistant was too shallow to understand the wisdom behind these words. He did as told. He broke one of the jars and was very surprised to see the other one break, too. "What are you trying to tell me?" I asked. To display my temper in front of Shams was a mistake, but I couldn't help it. "You and your stories. Damn it, can't you ever talk straight?" "But it is so clear, Aladdin. I am telling you that like the cross-eyed assistant you see dualities everywhere," Shams said. "Your father and I are one. If you break me, you'll break him as well." "You and my father have nothing in common," I riposted. "If I break the second jar, I'll set the first one free." I was so full of rage and resentment that I didn't consider the ramifications of my words. Not then. Not until much later. Not until it was too late. Shams Konya. June 1246. By and large, the narrow-minded say that dancing is sacrilege. They think God gave us music. Not only the music we make with our voices and instruments but the music underlying all forms of life, and then He forbade our listening to it. Don't they see that all nature is singing? Everything in this universe moves with a rhythm, the pumping of the heart, the flaps of a bird's wings, the wind on a stormy night, a blacksmith working iron, or the sounds an unborn baby is surrounded with inside the womb. Everything partakes, passionately and spontaneously, in one magnificent melody. The dance of the whirling dervishes is a link in that perpetual chain. Just as a drop of seawater carries within it the entire ocean, our dance both reflects and shrouds the secrets of the cosmos. Hours before the performance, Rumi and I retreated into a quiet room to meditate. The 6 dervishes who were going to whirl in the evening joined us. Together we performed our ablutions and prayed. Then we donned our costumes. Earlier we had talked at great length about what the proper attire should be and had chosen simple fabric and colors of the earth. The honey-colored hat symbolized the tombstone, the long white skirt the shroud, and the black cloak the grave. Our dance projected how Sufis discard the entire self, like shedding a piece of old skin. Before leaving the hall for the stage, Rumi recited a poem. The Gnostic has escaped from the 5 senses and the 6 directions and makes you aware of what is beyond them. With those feelings we were ready. First came the sound of the ney. Then Rumi entered the stage in his capacity as Smazenbashi. One by one, the dervishes followed him, their heads bowed in modesty. The last to appear had to be the sheikh. As firmly as I resisted the suggestion, Rumi insisted on my performing that part tonight. The Hafiz chanted a verse from the Quran. There are certainly signs on earth for people with certainty. And in yourselves as well. Do you not see? Then started the kudum accompanying the piercing sound of ney and rabab. Listen to the reed and the tale it tells, how it sings of separation. Ever since they cut me from the reed bed, my wail has caused men and women to weep. Giving himself over to the hands of God, the first dervish started to whirl, the hems of his skirts gently swishing with a separate life of their own. We all joined in and whirled until there remained around us nothing but oneness. Whatever we received from the skies, we passed on to the earth, from God to people. Each and every one of us became a link connecting the lover to the beloved. When the music ceased, we jointly bowed to the essential forces of the universe: fire, wind, earth, and water, and the 5th element, the void. I don't regret what transpired between me and Kekusra at the end of the performance. But I am sorry for putting Rumi in a difficult position. As a man who has always enjoyed privilege and protection, he has never before felt estranged from a ruler. Now he has at least a smattering of insight into something that average people experience all the time: the deep, vast rift between the ruling elite and the masses. And with that, I suppose I am nearing the end of my time in Konya. Every true love and friendship is a story of unexpected transformation. If we are the same person before and after we loved, that means we haven't loved enough. With the initiation of poetry, music, and dance, a huge part of Rumi's transformation is complete. Once a rigid scholar who disliked poetry and a preacher who enjoyed the sound of his own voice as he lectured others, Rumi is now turning into a poet himself, becoming the voice of pure emptiness, though he might not have realized this fully yet. As for me, I, too, have changed and am changing. I am moving from being into nothingness. From one season to another, one stage to the next, from life to death. Our friendship was a blessing, a gift from God. We thrived, rejoiced, bloomed, and basked in each other's company, savoring absolute fullness and felicity. I remembered what Baba Zaman once told me: for the silk to prosper, the silkworm had to die. Sitting there all alone in the whirling hall after everyone had left and the hubbub had died away, I knew that my time with Rumi was coming to an end. Through our companionship, Rumi and I had experienced an exceptional beauty and learned what it was like to encounter infinity through two mirrors reflecting each other endlessly.